Hey, 49ers fans, welcome to Inside the 49ers. And tonight it is Tuesday night, which means we have a special guest, Rob Schuh, joining us. And so this is the Hammerhead Show. Rob and I haven't been able to get together for a little bit, but we're going to be breaking down some good 49ers topics for you tonight. And we're going to start off with what we think is the biggest threat for the 49ers in 2023. But before we get there, I want to shout out Rob. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Jack. Glad to be back. Glad to be talking 49ers as it feels like we are moving towards the 2023 season.
We are going there. It really kicked off last week with the rookie mini camp taking place, and finally get to see the guys on the field. Not just talking about hypotheticals anymore. Now you can actually break down some practice and stuff like that. And so it was a lot of fun to get out there last Friday and actually see that. But I want to, you kind of looking around the landscape, the 49ers right now, you look at it, they're thought to be the number 2 team in the NFC or number 1 team in the NFC, depending on which sportsbook you go to in Vegas. When you look at this team heading into this season, what do you see as what could be the biggest threat for the 49ers in 2023?
I mean, this is a fascinating subject, right? I mean, the way in which we've been talking about this pre-show was an introduction to the fact that the 49ers in a sort of obscure measurement of rest that the 49ers have versus other teams in the NFL, it's actually an outlier that the 49ers have significantly less rest in between games. And this is an angle that I hadn't viewed before, but I looked at the schedule as a component to what was toughest as far as biggest threats for the 49ers prior to this information that really has been talked about today. I mean, just looking at the fact that we have the 9 road games, we have the second most miles traveled. I look at this roster as being very complete, but the way in which we have to go out and match up against teams, the games that must be played, those feel like the biggest intangibles at this point.
Yeah, and you look at it, and Warren Sharp from Fox Sports, he put out the list today, and the 49ers have the worst metric when it comes to number of days of rest. You look at this, the way that it breaks out, and the 49ers have minus 20 when it comes to days of rest going into it. And that's a tough one. One thing, the only positive to it is that you look at the rest of the league, and you especially with who the 49ers are going to have to be fighting to get into the Super Bowl with, or even get into the playoffs. And first off, you look at the NFC West, and the rest of the NFC West, with the exception of Arizona, who's not good anyway, is all in the minus with them. And then from that point, you start to look at where are the Chiefs, where are the Eagles, especially Eagles, because that's your primary. And the Eagles are right there too. This is an interesting one. The 49ers, first off, you look at their schedule, the way that they've got to go back and forth across the country with having this year be the NFC East, and along with the AFC, what is it, South? I think it is. No, not South. AFC North.
AFC North, right.
Right. So you're getting a lot of cross country travel to go to Washington. You're having to go out to Philadelphia. You're having to go to Pittsburgh, and then you're also having to go all the way out to Cincinnati. It's a much different schedule when it comes to travel than it was last year. Last year was nice because from like middle of November on, they never left the Pacific time zone. So much different in terms of travel this year as well. So you kind of start looking through this, and I think really the biggest threat to the 49ers might be their schedule and the fact that they have minus 20 against the competition in terms of rest days.
Absolutely. It seems to hinge against the 49ers' previous greatest advantage. George Kittle talked about it. Many Niners players have talked about this desire to bring the physicality when you're playing other teams. And that trend played out in a humorous fashion in teams being unable to actually win the following week after being battled and bruised against the 49ers. To have additional rest prior to the game should be advantageous for teams in making them as healthy as possible as they're about to go in and play against a very physical opponent. And so while it's maybe tough to say, oh, this is a clear disadvantage for the 49ers, I think you can make a compelling case for that. But even more so, you can make a compelling case that it takes away a previous advantage that they had, where they were going to impose their physical will upon other teams. And that's going to be slightly more difficult to do against teams that are that much healthier and that much more well-rested coming into each matchup.
Yeah, and one of the hard things when you start to look at the way that this is all really broken down, one of the reasons they get to -20, like our pal over here, Flave's son, who changed his name from what it normally is. That's a joke from another stream, I believe. He says it's -20, but a big reason that it's -20 is the 49ers don't get the benefit of the +7 on the bye week. Normally, you get the bye week, you're the rest of the team. They're still going to get their rest, but the problem is that they don't get the rest advantage over their opponents because Jacksonville's coming off their bye week at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I did see somebody, on Twitter was talking about how back in 2013, the 49ers, they played five of their last six or something like that on the road when you include the regular season and then the postseason. Remember, they went to Green Bay, then they went to Carolina, and then they went up to Seattle. And what they were talking, he was saying how that team just ran out of steam up in Seattle. Well, I mean, I would say I think the team ran out of steam up in Seattle when the quarterback fumbled the ball, threw an interception on the last three possessions of the game. I think that had more to do with it than running out of steam. But we've seen this team, and I think the one piece about this is George Kittle was one of the people that was outspoken about having two Thursday night games and how that shouldn't be happening. And that's one of the things that the 49ers have. They have two Thursday night games. I think that Thursday night games are a bigger issue for the 49ers really than this threat here. I think the fact that they have two Thursday night games, that could be even a bigger potential threat to the 49ers than having this rest day, -20 rest days.
Yeah, and it does factor in, right? That simple fact that the Niners have those two Thursday night games play into days of rest they have in between. And so the NFL has not done the 49ers any favors. And I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy, Jack. Like I'm Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is most often the most logical explanation. And yet, I will say, with the way in which this schedule has come out with the Thursday night games and the simple fact, the biggest factor for me where I have to question if the Niners are being trolled by the NFL is the week 13 matchup against Philly. Like the idea that they were like, hey, what if we made it the same number of the quarterback who was knocked out of the NFC Championship game? And then the Eagles grabbed onto that and trolled us one layer harder and put Hassan Reddick as the guy on the image for that week 13 matchup when they put it out on Twitter. So we're just getting trolled all the way around. The NFL's having their laughs. They're like, oh, George Kittle, you don't like Thursday night games? Well, you got two of them this year. Again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. A lot of these things break out as luck of the draw. And the NFL does have control over when these games are played. It's one of the few things that, they can tweak if they want to. So I'm just leaving it there. That's
a good one. And then we got the -20 there, but then also says glad the Giants have to come to us though on a Thursday night game. But that's one of the things I know you just mentioned the Thursday night games. I mentioned them more because of just the toll that it takes on the players' bodies. In terms of this stat though, the -20 days of rest, it doesn't impact them because the other team is also coming in with a short rest. So that's where it's a really interesting stat. They just have a lot of teams. They're playing shorter weeks than other teams, and that's really all it comes down to. And we'll see how it plays off of them. I think they'll be okay. You look at the schedule, and it's tough, and we're going to get to that in a second. But we'll see. I mean, this Giants one, you're glad the Giants are coming to the 49ers. That's an interesting one because the Giants are coming from cross country to play in Arizona. They're probably going to stay in Arizona on the West Coast for that game. The 49ers are traveling home from playing in Los Angeles the week before as well. So just an interesting way that one matches up. Texas Niner coming in with a different look at this. He says the biggest threat is consistent quarterback play. If Brock doesn't play, I'm not sold Darnold or Lance can be consistent. What are your thoughts on this one? I know we have quarterback coming up a little bit later, but what are your thoughts on this one?
We absolutely do have that coming up later, and we'll hit on it in greater detail. But I think Texas Niners is absolutely on to something. By the way, I just wanted to say what's up. I saw his shout out to me earlier. Appreciate that, Texas Niner. Absolutely, quarterback play is going to be paramount to our success. I do believe that this roster is talented enough to overcome to some extent quality quarterback play. But in the NFL, it all comes down to that, especially when you get into the higher stakes of the playoffs. And so if we're looking at a situation where, a nightmare scenario that Brock isn't able to play at the beginning of the season and one of the other quarterbacks has taken the realms, I feel more confident that either of those with the roster behind them will be able to win in the regular season. As things tighten up, as we get into the playoffs, I do think that this absolutely will factor into the 49ers' ability to make that run, because we're not going to be well rested at the end of this season. It is sort of a gauntlet as we continue to go through. We don't have that chance to stay over on the East Coast unless we do the weird Monday night game with Minnesota. So I do think that quarterback play is absolutely going to factor into this. But I'm not as worried as Texas Niner, because I actually have a lot of faith in Brock's progress to this point and the two guys behind him.
Yeah, I hear that. And then, and I'm with you. I don't know if it's necessarily the biggest threat, because now they are a little bit deeper. And, I'm sorry, but I need to get into Sam Darnold a little bit. You do have Trey Lance, and if you don't have Brock Purdy, or let's say Brock Purdy starts and something happens and then Trey Lance, or however it works out, whatever the machinations are that get you into any of these three guys having to play, I think the 49ers can win games with all three of these guys. You look at Sam Darnold. This is a guy who we know can play well in spurts. He did it at the beginning of the 2021 season when he had Christian McCaffrey healthy. When he was healthy, he played at a very high level those first 3 weeks of the 2021 season. Fell off a little bit later on as that year went along, but he had a really good start when he had the biggest weapons with him. And then last year, he was 4-2, and I'm not going to say that he played great, but he played well enough to win. And he did. I felt like in those games, he played it like the 49ers would ask him to play, which was ball control, make a few throws here and there, hit a deep shot every once in a while. But other than that, we're just going to ask you to do some play action, really simple stuff. For the most part, he was able to handle that pretty well. I know the stats from the game against New Orleans. I know that was a bad one. They still won the game. What have you, whatever it is. But, as for it's a much better situation with Sam Darnold than it is with Josh Johnson, if that's where you end up.
And that's a similar circumstance, right, where you could see games with the 49ers and that talented roster wherein a quarterback doesn't necessarily have the greatest statistical game. And yet, because the rest of the roster can compensate, it's as of last year, the number one rated defense, you can still win those games just by asking less of the quarterback position. Fewer mistakes.
And that's kind of where the 49ers are anyway, right? The 49ers have such a deep roster. They don't need the quarterback to carry this team. You just need the quarterback to be competent and to be able to make the plays that you are there to be made. And that's one of the things that I'm going to hold off on that, because we're going to talk quarterbacks in a little bit. We're kind of starting to already travel down that road, but getting back to the biggest threat of 2023, I think it starts off with the -20 in terms of the rest. And then the schedule is really rough for the 49ers. There's a really tough stretch here. You and I haven't had a chance to chat about the schedule since it was brought out. When you look at the schedule, what were some of your thoughts?
I did an initial breakdown wherein I tried to say to myself, do I believe that this schedule is tougher than last year's? And as I started to look through it and look through the miles traveled, the number of road games, the lack of ability to do a really convenient back-to-back East Coaster, 4 early starts. When I look at the caliber of teams that we're going up against because of the first place divisional finish, the divisions that we're playing up against, obviously the AFC North is tough coming into it. And we believe that going into last season. So some of those are unknown. You go in thinking the AFC West was going to be an impossible gauntlet. And then the Raiders and the Broncos didn't end up being who we thought they would in 2022. So that's entirely possible for 2023, but seems less likely with that division. It feels like we know who those contenders are, and they're very serious contenders indeed. So I'm going to say that this is a tougher schedule than the one that we faced last year, and I do think that the Niners have an uphill road to go.
I'm with you on that. I would agree with you that this is a tougher schedule than what they had last year. That's partly why, last year when I looked at their schedule and I started to predict out the games, I came out to a record of 13-4. I didn't come out to that number this year. It wasn't, I was starting to look at it, and you look, there's a couple of them where you're like, I think they can, if you just take it out and you put it in a vacuum and you don't put in travel and tired of, all those kind of things, how that plays into it. then I could easily see 14-3 for this team, right? But that's not the case. That's just not the way
Right.
that it works out. You start to look at this, and I think it's a schedule that they can manage. It's, they don't have the East Coast, where they can stay back to back on the East Coast. But what they do have, and I don't understand, I've heard some people say, well, because it's a Monday night game. But if I'm the 49ers, I am staying in Youngstown between that, after they beat Cleveland in week 6. I'm staying in Youngstown and then traveling to Minnesota for the next game, because it's just a shorter trip that way.
Yeah.
That would be, when you start to look at their schedule, that's really the only place where they might stay over, and that's where I think they should. And we'll see what they decide to do.
And I agree with you on that they should. It always sounds to me, with the language Kyle Shanahan uses when discussing those stayovers, it always sounds like it's a mixed bag as far as how the players feel about it, right? You can imagine that, hey, if you have a loved one or kids or whatever at home, you may not want to be on the road for 7 consecutive days. So having that one additional night, it doesn't seem like much. But given the language that's used and just needing one extra day for travel, I do wonder if the 49ers will opt to stay in Youngstown. I agree that it's the right call. I think they should do that. My gut says that they won't.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll see. We don't know. They haven't, that's something that I'm sure we won't even know until the season starts. Usually
Right.
they're pretty quiet on that kind of stuff. Even last year, I think they said, we think we're going to, but we don't know for sure. We'll figure that out as we go along. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. When you start to look at this schedule, Rob, what do you think as far as a final win-loss record for the 49ers in 2023? What do you think is realistic?
Yeah, I mean, this one is actually tough because the way in which the schedule breaks out, because of some of the unknowns. I mean, trying to handicap the win-loss record without truly knowing who your starting quarterback is going to be is wild. And yet, I think it is fair to point out that almost regardless of who's going to be starting at the beginning of the year, Vegas probably isn't moving those odds. They're probably keeping that win-loss at the same place. When I go through this, not a specific, I'm not willing to commit to we're winning here, we're losing here. But after rolling through it several times, I find the number that I'm most comfortable with for win-loss to be at 12-5 for the 49ers. I was a little less optimistic than you going into last offseason. You were right about this one. So I'm anxious to hear where you land at, because you nailed it on the head last year.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so you said they're going to be 12-5. So before I give you my prediction, I want to know who are the 5 teams this season that are going to beat the 49ers.
See, that's the tough thing that I haven't landed on yet. I've not committed to our 5 losses. I've played different scenarios where we've lost to different teams, and 12-5 feels like the safe number for the record.
That sounds good. And then, we got Ian Sharp over here. He's cheating. He says 12-14. That's cheating, man. That's a big gap. 12-14. That's a big swing. I'm going to tell you right now, my prediction is 12-5. That was what I put out when it broke.
Look at that.
Kind of looked at it. I put together something for the Press Democrat the day after the schedule came out. I come out to 12-5, and I look at it this way. I see the 49ers starting off 6-0. You just look at these games. I know Pittsburgh's tough, but Pittsburgh doesn't score any points unless it's if it rains out there, then we'll take a look at that. But if it's good conditions, I don't see the 49ers being held to 10 points for the second year in a row in Pittsburgh, and I think they win that game. And I have them going 6-0 all the way down. Their first loss coming in Minnesota on that Monday night game. Just tough environment. Minnesota was 8-1 at home last year. Minnesota, I think, is going to be better because they got a new defensive coordinator. That was their problem last year. So I think they're going to be just a better team. So I give that to Minnesota. Then the following week, you come home, you face Cincinnati, another team that has all the weapons that gives you trouble. It's a loss to Cincinnati. Plus, if they stay out there, they usually struggle on their first game home after staying on the East Coast or in the central part of the United States there. When they did Cincinnati, even back in 2019, they won the game against Pittsburgh, but they still started off slow in that one. Remember all the turnovers. So those are the first 2 losses. Then I have a loss up in Seattle on Thursday night, Thanksgiving. Geno Smith, Jamal Adams eating some turkey legs at the 50-yard line after that one.
Oh, no. Oh no, Jack, you're killing me with that prediction.
I have them losing the following week, week 13 in Philadelphia. Um, that's a really tough matchup, and that's one that I can see going either way. But if I'm being honest, I probably give that one to the Eagles because it's in Philadelphia. So I'm giving that one to the Eagles there. And then the final loss is the week 17 in Washington. Now, you look at this one. I know they don't have a quarterback. Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, Jake from State Farm. I mean, it's a bad group of quarterbacks. But what I don't like about that game is they're playing on Christmas night and then having to travel all the way across the country to play on New Year's Eve. And not only that, but they're playing the 10 a.m. game. That's just a brutal schedule right there. So I understand the Washington, the deficiencies possibly of that offense, but that defense is going to be good. And I just see that as being a really tough game for the 49ers. So that's where I give them their fifth loss.
And those all seem quite prudent as potential places for the 49ers to stub their toes. I mean, when I look at this schedule, again, not having landed on which I'm going to attribute win versus loss, but I see the weak points. I think week 1 against the Steelers is a real tough place to start out. And week 1, you're talking about a 49ers team that under Kyle Shanahan has not started out as hot as one would like. Some slow starts, playing in Pittsburgh, definitely going to be difficult. And 2 defensive teams, right? We saw what happened between the Niners and Cowboys. And then I see that stretch of week 5 through week 8. Those 4 games, 3 out of the 4 are tough. Cowboys, Browns, Bengals. I think the Browns are going to be vastly improved from last year. I expect Deshaun Watson to have knocked off the rust. That pass rush in adding Zadarius Smith feels like the bookend that I wish the 49ers had for Nick Bosa. The Bengals at home, high-flying offense. Unless Brock Purdy is cooking by that point, I have a hard time imagining keeping up in a true shootout there. And then you mentioned the stretches that's going to be difficult. Week 12, 13, 14, where you've got at the Seahawks, at Philly, back against the Seahawks. I sure hope you're wrong about week 12. I want to see the Niners Thanksgiving night eating frickin' turkey legs on Seattle's field, much like I had to watch them do it on Levi's in whatever year that was, 2014. But then that's a tough matchup at Philly. And certainly I think you calling out the Commanders game, traveling over there. It's a New Year's Eve game, West Coast, crappy weather in Washington. Commanders are at home, all sorts of distractions. You could see seeding be a question, but maybe the Niners have already clinched the division. A lot of things set up to drop one of those late games. And the Ravens, no slouch the week prior in week 16, historically have really struggled with those mobile quarterbacks. So a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and when it comes to that Ravens game, the reason I give that one to the 49ers is the Ravens don't travel well. That's the one thing. They haven't traveled well for the last few years. They're like under 500 on the road. So, I think that plays to the 49ers' favor. And
That's big.
The other part of it, too, with Lamar Jackson, I know I was one of those who was calling for the 49ers to go out and sign Lamar Jackson, but week 16, something like that? Is Lamar Jackson even going to be playing at that point? Because in the last couple of years, he's been banged up by that time of the season. So we'll see. And then we got Flave's son who comes in and says Seahawks, Browns, Bengals, Cowboys, and Ravens as the losses. I mean, you can. Those are all games that you can easily make a case for the 49ers losing. So
no doubt. And Flave's son comes back in to talk about that Steelers game. Hey, no one on the Steelers offense is going to be able to do anything against our defense. I really agree with that statement. I don't think that will be the case. But when you have a super low scoring game, if they're not able to do anything on offense, but their defense is fairly stout and able to contain the 49ers, it's on the road, it's an early start. Those are the types of games that are often decided by too many penalties, an additional turnover for one team or the other. When you have a one-score matchup, that ball can bounce in funny ways. And oftentimes, that's what I find to be the disadvantage of that early start is it's not truly the body clock. It's not that your muscles aren't the same at 10 a.m. It's that your brain isn't. It's that you're not functioning at the same level, and the way in which you're processing things is different, can lead to additional mistakes, costly penalties. And again, in a close matchup, I don't think the Steelers are going to outman the 49ers, but in a ball bouncing one way or the other type of an event, I could see losing that game and starting off 0-1.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I can see that. I just don't think that's going to happen. But, also to where he says no one on the Steelers offense is going to be able to do anything against our defense. Well, okay. Last year in week 1, the 49ers defense held Chicago to 204 yards, and they lost because they gave up 19 points. I know it wasn't all because of the offense not moving. There was some help by the defense with penalties,
right,
as well, right? But also remember, the 49ers were their own worst enemy on offense. They fumbled the ball deep in their own territory. There was a couple of times they just did not get points on the board where they could have scored touchdowns. They got nothing out of one of them. They got a field goal the other time. It wasn't a good performance. The 49ers offense only put up 10 points. So I agree. I don't think the Steelers offense is going to be all that great. But we've seen the 49ers lose these games in the past, and they just did it last year. So, let me ask you this. You start to look at the schedule. It popped up over there, but I'm going to ask you this one. The best game of 2023 is going to be which one?
Ooh, the best game of 2023 is going to be a Super Bowl rematch. Niners-Bengals. While I have my doubts about whether or not the 49ers are going to be able to answer shot for shot against that Bengals high-flying offense, it's going to be the most exciting, right? That's going to be the game where it is just fireworks. The Cincinnati Bengals coming into Levi's Stadium. The Niners should be able to match up against them. It's a top-level competitor, a true test for, hey, what are we going to be able to do within the playoffs? Are we real contenders, or are we just able to beat up on the teams that are lesser than we are? That feels like the first really significant challenge on the schedule. It's sort of midway through the season, and that's going to be a real barometer of like, hey, we're no longer in the slow start of the season. As long as there's not some, new injury that occurs, one would assume that Brock Purdy will be back in, unless some other quarterback not to be named yet has beaten him out and claimed that, in which case that's great. But anyways, the offense should be clicking on all cylinders at that point. So we should see that type of a shootout. And I think it's going to come down to the last minute.
I think that'll be a really good game. That was a really good game between the two teams back in 2021. Went in the overtime. The front defense gets a stop, and then the offense goes down and scores a touchdown. Really nice play by Brandon Ayuk. Tough to finish it off. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go with my best game of 2023 being the one I think everybody's looking at, and it's the game against the Eagles, Week 13 in Philadelphia. That's going to be the best game. I'm going to give you a little bit different reason why. I'm old school in that I love physical football.
Yes.
I know there's a lot of folks that like the deep ball, like the old TV commercial, baseball commercial said, chicks dig the long ball. So yeah,
chicks dig the long ball.
It's kind of the same thing when it comes to football. They love the deep pass, and that kind of stuff. But for me, I love the running game. I love the physicality of the running game because for me, there's nothing that's more aesthetically pleasing than a really well running play. Because so many people have it all just kind of breaks. And if you watch it, you just see boom, boom. And it's a thing of beauty, really, when you really get down to it. The other reason I'm really excited about this game, and this is for the older generation that was around in 1990 that actually watched the 49ers when they were used to win Super Bowls. But December 3rd, 1990, Candlestick Park, Monday Night Football, I believe it was the 8-1 49ers took on the 9-0 New York Giants. Anybody that watched that game knows what physical football is, because that was a 7-3 game. They were beating the crap out of each other all over the field. That's the game where at the end of it, you have Ronnie Lott up in Phil Simms' face because Simms had been talking some trash about the 49ers. I see this as that kind of a game because of everything that went on last year. These are the two best teams in the NFC, just like the Giants and the Niners were the two best teams back in 1990. So I really look forward to seeing that Philadelphia game.
I totally agree in the artistry that is a well-designed run play and a well-executed run play. It's like a symphony. You have layers to it, right? Various musical instruments coming in at different points along the way. And certainly a Shanahan designed run play is often a thing of beauty when executed at all levels. And I'm with you that I love watching that physicality. I love a good defensive matchup. When it's a 10-7 game, a lot of people see that as a snooze fest. Au contraire, mon frère. Like that to me is just insert your will, your dominance onto the other person. And the Niners have been so good and such a physical team in doing that. To me, that's a joy to watch. It's like, when did you break the opponent's spirit? What play were you able to shift that momentum just barely to your side, wherein you escape this one with a close, hard-fought win? I find those to be as compelling as the high-flying act of, let's put 56 points up on the board for each offense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'd actually rather see the 10-7 game. I just think that's a more stressful game. I actually like the stress-filled games because it's like, who's going to win? Are they going to be able to make a stop here? What, can they make a play here? It's not like, right. This, they're just going up and down the field like arena football. So we'll see. It'll be fun. And then real quick, I did want to ask this one. Clarsard 49 says, anyone traveling this season to any games? I'm putting this one up because I'll answer this one first. I'm going to a few. I'm going to be week 1 in Pittsburgh. Just like last year, I went out to Chicago for week 1. So I'm planning right now to get out to Pittsburgh for week 1. I was a little bummed. I wanted that to be Philly because I don't get to travel to the big, long away games very often because I pay for my own travel to get to these things. I do get the benefit of the press pass and stuff once I get there, but the rest of my travel I pay for. So I'm saying I'm going to Pittsburgh, Los Angeles. That's an easy one. And most likely Arizona. So those will be my road games for this year. How about you, Rob?
There are some good ones on the schedule. Unfortunately, most of the favorable games that would be the most fun to attend are at stadiums that I've already been to. So I'm attempting to check off every stadium in the NFL, much like Philly. Philly is going to be an incredible game. I don't know that I want to revisit that stadium. I had a pretty horrific experience in the stands with those fans. They're just as annoying as it gets. Turns out worse than Seahawks fans. Then the Seahawks game is one I usually just drive up to, being here in Portland, but it's on Thanksgiving, so I'll probably be down in California, so that screws it up. There are only 3 games that we play that are at stadiums on the road I haven't been to, so I will most likely select one of those. Jacksonville is one, Cleveland is the other, and then Washington. I'd be inclined to Washington, do a nice, tour of our fine federal buildings and all of that, but it's on New Year's Eve. I don't know that I want to be in Washington, D.C. with D.C. weather on December 31st. That just sounds nasty. So the game that holds the most intrigue is just going to be much like week 1 with Pittsburgh, which I may go to since you're going to be there. My best friend's a Steelers fan. Might just have to make that happen. But Cleveland, week 6. It's a football town. I can't wait to meet that fan base. I believe that Cleveland is going to be a much tougher matchup this year than they were last. That sets up to be a fun game and a good stadium to check off for me.
Yeah, that would be a fun one. Cleveland, Cleveland rocks and all that kind of stuff. That would be a fun one to check out there. For me, if there's one of the games that I don't think I'll be able to make it to, but I would love to get out to Minnesota, partly because that's where my mom's from. So I have family out in Minnesota area. So I've traveled out there a couple of times as a kid. It's been a long time since I've been out there. It was the late 80s the last time I was in Minnesota. But I'd love to get out there for that one. If there was one on the schedule that I'm not currently expecting to go to, that would be one of them.
That might be the most gorgeous stadium in the NFL. It's at least top 3. I mean, you've seen SoFi in person. That's very impressive. I don't like the exterior facade of that building, whereas Minnesota is like jaw-dropping inside and out. All of those glass windows. The only downside of the glass windows is the bird society's getting upset because birds fly into the glass and fall down. So that's the issue with the stadium. But from a human perspective, where we don't care about other animals, it's fantastic.
It looks great. I like SoFi. SoFi is a fantastic stadium. The stadium out in Vegas is very similar. It's basically the same. It's basically the same. Feels the same as SoFi when you're inside. It really does. Except for you have grass instead of AstroTurf, and you don't have that. The board that falls down in the middle, and you also don't have somebody screaming whose house throughout the game, and you don't walk out of Vegas for a game that I was there. At least I didn't walk out of the stadium with a headache because of the constant just noise reverberating throughout that building.
That is absolutely true. And it's close to action. Good stadiums are downtown where you walk out of the stadium. Minnesota is like that. You walk out of the stadium, you're in freaking downtown Minnesota. You walk out of Vegas, you're on the strip. walk out of Levi's, you're in Santa Clara. Like it's a different vibe.
Yeah, you mean go to the amusement park, Rob? You don't like roller coasters? What's wrong with you?
I love Santa Clara, and there's a great ramen spot. Right, I just gave that away, and now there's going to be a longer wait at the ramen spot. But there's a great ramen spot by the stadium.
Yep. And then Jay Mills says, I think John Taylor had the only touchdown in that game, or was that the playoff game? I will have to look it up. They gave us 6 field goals, so they gave up 6 field goals to the stupid Giants that year. No touchdown. Shake my head. You are right, Jay Mill. The touchdown that the 49ers only scored 2 touchdowns against the Giants that year. Both of them were by John Taylor. John Taylor with a 23-yard grab from Joe Montana in the second quarter to take the lead. And then I believe it was a second quarter touchdown in the NFC Championship game as well. It was either second quarter or early in the third. It might have been early in the second half. One of those two.
One of the more underrated wide receivers out there, and purely for the reason that he played alongside the GOAT. It's hard to shine when you are next to the best of the best.
I'm a huge John Taylor fan. I think that I agree with you. He's very underrated.
Yes.
This is a guy who you just kind of look through the big plays that happened during that Super Bowl stretch from 88 to 90. He made a bunch of those big plays, especially 89, the 2 90-plus yard touchdowns against the Rams to come back in that game. The year before in 88, I know he catches a touchdown to win the Super Bowl, but his punt return his punt return against the Washington team on Monday night was the one that set that whole thing, because that was just a crazy punt return. He catches it, kind of goes backwards. He's at like the 5-yard line, takes off, jumps over somebody, and he sprints to the end zone for a touchdown. And then he was there through 94 as well for that Super Bowl. So John Taylor, I think, I definitely think he is, as you said, and the third string all pro over here says John Taylor's super underrated. And I agree with you guys on that one.
No doubt.
Yep. So yeah, the schedule's going to be fun. We both have them at 12 wins. That's a great call on your part. I'll just say that right now. Because
anytime I'm in agreement and lockstep with you, Jack, I feel like I've done well on my homework assignment.
Yeah, it was a good one. I approve very much of that one. And then we start to turn the page now to how this roster is put together. And we started that on Friday. The 49ers had their rookie minicamp kicked off Friday. They went through Saturday and Sunday as well. We got to be there. The media was on hand Friday. It was interesting. There were some interesting things. My biggest takeaway from rookie minicamp was that the drafted players, as you would expect, were the best players on the field. That's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
There could be times when they're not, but the guys that were drafted were the best. I know that there's a highlight clip out there of Jacour. I'm blanking on his last name right now. Jacour. What was his last name? Pearson. Jacour Pearson, number 82. Right. You see that all over the place. Really long catch. That was a really nice play. And I'll just say Jacour Pearson is a guy who went into rookie minicamp with professional experience. He'd been in rookie camps prior in the NFL. He went through an entire season with the XFL. He's out there playing against a guy who just joined the team as an undrafted free agent, his first ever practice, and he toasted him. Take that for what it's worth.
Right.
Not to take anything away from Pearson, but just to kind of put some kind of give you some context behind it. And then a few plays later, the guy the 49ers did draft, Ronnie Bell, went down the left sideline, beat the same cornerback on a deep go route down the left sideline, and made a really nice catch of his own. So Ronnie Bell's going to be around.
Yeah, where's your hype meter on Ronnie Bell? Where are you feeling that? Is that like, hey, cool your jets, like this will be a complimentary player that's going to be at the fringe of the roster, or is this someone that you see as potentially making some waves?
He's a fringe roster guy, right? He's competing with those guys at the bottom end of the rotation. You know that the top 4 are set. We know that it's going to be Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, Raven McLeod. We know those 4. Then I would say probably Danny Gray at number 5. He's going to have to earn his spot, but I would say Gray's at 5. And then you're looking at a guy like Bell. Do you hold 6? I think the 49ers would carry 6.
Right.
And I see him as being a guy who can really fit in. One of the things that I'd heard a lot about with him was his physicality, his ability to go up and get the ball.
Yeah, high point it and that acrobatic nature.
Yes, and that is exactly what we saw on Friday. He did it. First off, the first catch that he made on a deep post route, He went up and got it. It wasn't over a guy. It wasn't over a rookie. It was over a veteran, Trace Willing, who was with the 49ers last year. Went up on a deep ball over the middle. It was a kind of a deep post underthrown. Went up, got it. The deep ball that he caught, a little bit underthrown, went up and got it. Then he caught a really nice ball over the middle. It was a tight window kind of throw. So I think he's not one of those guys that you look at and say, wow, he looks like an NFL wide receiver, like his body isn't there yet. He definitely doesn't look like Deebo Samuel. But I think this is a guy that can fill out. The toughness is always going to be there. That's not going to change. Just, see how he gets through this first year. Think of a guy like Drake Jackson, right? Who now in year 2 is putting on muscle, putting on weight. Yeah, I think that can be what we see with Ronnie Bell. I think he sticks with his roster, though.
I love that prediction. It feels like if he can continue making those plays that become clear that the effort is there, that the athleticism is there, and then can contribute on special teams as that 6th wide receiver, it feels like a good path towards securing a roster spot, continuing to build towards a more NFL-worthy frame that could withstand a higher catch count over the season.
Yeah, it definitely is. And he also has the ability to return punts, which is something the 49ers, I think, are looking at. Last year it was, Danny Gray was the second guy in terms of that. But you always try to get as many people as you can. And I don't think we'll see Ray McLeod pass this year. So you start to build up. Again, this draft I felt like was all about depth, building depth, other than the kicking position. Other than the kicker, it was all about depth. And I think they did a really nice job of that. Third string All-Pro says, who was the Northwestern quarterback? He had the same surgery as Brock Purdy had, and that is the quarterback out of Northwestern, Clayton Thorson. Thorson had the internal brace surgery. He injured his elbow playing in the XFL. He was cleared in January. I believe, I don't know when his surgery took place, but I know that he was placed on like their IR back at the beginning of June. So about 6 months from post-surgery, he was back. Probably a little bit less than 6 months post-surgery. He was cleared.
That timeline lines up.
Yeah. And I don't know what his arm was like before, but if you've seen the highlight of the throw to Pearson, you know that ball traveled quite a long ways. So we'll get into the quarterbacks in a little bit, but yeah, that was interesting. That was an interesting note that I did not notice prior. I've heard it since, but he's an older player, 27. He definitely was the better of the two quarterbacks that they had.
It's funny. We will take all signs of encouragement that Brock Purdy is going to be who we want him to be post-surgery.
Right. I mean, we're going to talk quarterbacks in a minute, but real quick, Tua wants to Jack, what does your thumbnail mean? Well, my thumbnail means the 49ers. If you were here at the beginning of the show, the first topic was the biggest challenge that the 49ers are going to face this season. What's the one thing that they need to overcome? For me, we talked about number 1, the lack of rest. Number 2, the schedule and some of the time that they have there. And there's another one that we're going to get to here in a minute. In terms of, at least for me, but we'll talk about it at another point. When it comes to roster competition, another spot is going to be offensive line. I don't know, the 49ers, it's nice that they're returning 4 of their 5 starters from last season. They seemingly have a guy already set up at right tackle in Colton McKivitz. But then they go out and they sign John Feliciano, who was a guy that started on across all 3 spots along the interior offensive line, who has stated that he feels like he's coming in to come compete. John Lynch says that it's, at least at right guard, that there's a path for him to start at right guard. So I start to look at this competition, and the big competition is going to take place at right guard and right tackle. I have a feeling that you might see Spencer Burford at right tackle, at least competing early on, or maybe even going a little bit back and forth between those 2 spots.
You are not the only co-host that I have been with that has suggested that. And I could see something like that happening. And one of the trusted voices that I have has given me some coaching on feeling that Burford isn't going to make that transition, that it wouldn't be quite as good of a fit. And that logic aligns more with what I feel I've observed since we've got all the pieces of information, right? Going into the draft, it was pretty common for everyone to say, hey, right tackle was the biggest need for the 49ers. And potentially, had we a different selection in the second round, or definitely in the first, we may have wanted to address that. But in looking at it in totality, looking back, I now think we're at a situation where the Niners feel a heck of a lot better about Colton McKivitz than most everyone else, and that this is much more similar to the Jake Brendel situation last year, where it really ended up being his position to lose. So I know John Lynch will say the right things about competition. Clearly, when you're bringing in a free agent in order to sign them, much like the language used with Sam Darnold, there has to be a path for a well-qualified free agent to earn a spot on the roster. And it's also fair to point out when that is an uphill battle. I feel like that's going to be the situation at right tackle, that McKivitz is going to be the heavy favorite going into it, and I won't be surprised when he wins that competition.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Because McKivitz is, I think, probably their best swing tackle. Jalen Moore, Jalen Moore. I would be. You look at the roster. I don't know if there's anybody that can necessarily beat him out. But if you're playing Jalen Moore, you're in trouble, especially based off of what we saw of him last year. He looked okay as a rookie. Last year, he just didn't look like he belonged on the field. So we'll see how Jalen Moore, if he's progressed. They did get the veteran in free agency as well, so I know that's out there. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out.
And, I won't discount the fact that there are two positions I feel the 49ers could still make moves at. One seems more likely while we're still here in the offseason. That's adding some other veteran edge. But right tackle is another one. And edge could be, if we don't make any moves, wherein the 49ers will have the assets necessary to pull the trigger on any in-season trades. So while it feels like the roster is set right now, or will be when we're in training camp and they make all of those signings and additions there absolutely will be some team that's expecting to push for the playoffs that by midseason looks like they're out of it. Perhaps the head coach has been fired and there's some, tackle on that team that is nearing the end of their contract, or an edge player. I could see the 49ers being active in that regard because of the fact that they're well within that Super Bowl window and have to feel like this is a great opportunity for them to push chips into the middle of the table.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And then Andrew H over here, he says McKivitz will start and will play very well. I like the belief there. I felt pretty good about the center position last year. I felt like the Flyers offensive line as a whole was going to be okay throughout the offseason. And then, training camp hit and you didn't have Mike McGlinchey, you didn't have Trent Williams. The offensive line doesn't look good. Everybody started losing their minds. And then, all of a sudden Mike McGlinchey and Trent Williams show up to practice, or all of a sudden the offensive line starts blocking again. It's crazy it's crazy how it works when both your best tackles are there, how much better your offensive line can look.
Crazy.
It is. And then Lorenzo Gonzalez says, "What's up, fellas? Grad school coaching, family man is a horrible mix. The two journalistic goats are live again. Thank you very much. Appreciate that." And he says, "We need more cowbell, fellas. More content together, fellas. Miss you guys." Hey, and it's kind of the same for both Rob and myself. We got a bunch of stuff that's going on between with family, with work, and I do cover the 49ers, and unfortunately at this point it's not my full-time job because it just doesn't pay enough, doesn't pay the bills. So I got to do something else to help pay those bills. That's partly what YouTube's about, but there's still a lot of stuff goes on to it. So that's why we haven't been able to collaborate. So get those super chats rolling.
That's right. Hit that like button. Get the subscribers up. Right. Let's get Jack's channel to 50,000, and then we'll talk. But Lorenzo's right. We certainly need more cowbell. There's always more cowbell needed.
Oh yeah, you can't have too much cowbell. There's no such thing as too much cowbell. And then another spot that I don't think people really are looking at in terms of roster competition, but I think it's going to be fascinating, is the linebacker position. I know they're locked in with the top two. You've got Fred Warner, you've got Dre Greenlaw, but behind that, it's a fascinating position for this team because they have a number of really good players in there. When I did my roster breakdown, what I thought this roster might look like, I know it's crazy because we just got through OTAs. So I did a roster prediction yesterday. I went with 6 linebackers. I have Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Oren Burks. Those 3 I think are locks no matter what. Burks is really good on special teams as part of it. And then that's where it starts to gets into the competition. You have Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles, Marcelino McCurry-Ball, Jalen Graham, who was the rookie that they just drafted in round 7. And you have D. Winter, who is another draft pick, somebody that they took in round 6. So, when I put mine together, I kept Flanagan Fowles on the roster. I kept Marcelino McCurry Ball on the roster, and I went with Jalen Graham over D Winters. And the reason the
Wow.
reason for it is after seeing these guys on the field, I would say like if you looked at the linebackers and you said I need to like what's his body look like, Jalen Graham looks like Fred Warner. Everything about him, he's built like Fred Warner. He's really smooth. He's good in coverage. So it's going to be fun to see how this linebacker position fills out and how many they actually decide to keep. Because I have them keeping 6.
I think they have to keep 6 when you list all of those names, right? Because you're keeping 6 and you're looking at one of those names falling off and getting scooped up, right? I mean, it's not as if this is one where you keep 6 and then the 7th makes it onto the practice squad. This is one where whomever the Niners cut, other teams will absolutely be all over that, looking at, hey, can we swoop up a quality linebacker? And I got to call out that, Scott McLuhan was high on Jalen Graham, and that is a voice that I trust when it comes to talent evaluation. So it doesn't actually surprise me that he passes the eye test for you as well. That's a fascinating one where I'm sure the Niners will try to sneak somebody onto the practice squad, but I would guess that someone doesn't make it and gets swept up by another greedy team.
Yeah, I think you're starting to look at that. It's going to be, I think, it's Flanagan Fowles, Marcelino McCurry Ball. I think those are the 2 that might get knocked off. One of those 2 by Winters. But we'll see. And like with Graham again, it's just this is a guy who played kind of more of a safety role than a linebacker role in college. There's so much similarity between him and Fred Warner. It's kind of crazy with the way that they went about it. So we'll see. But it's going to be fun. And one other spot we need to talk about before we head out of here is when it comes to roster competition, quarterback. Quarterback's going to have a little bit of competition this year. You've got Brock Purdy. We're not sure what's going to happen there. You've got Trey Lance, and then you've got everybody's favorite newcomer, Sam Darnold, who's going to be in the mix as well. When you start to look at this position, at the quarterback position, if you needed to make a prediction today, who are you saying is going to be the starter for the 49ers week 1?
I'm going to say that I have come full circle on this one, Jack. And I think that it's always tricky to come full circle in the offseason because you're typically not basing your change of opinion off of film or observable behavior. It's typically off of what someone has said. And so coming into it, I just did the math on the timeline. I just looked at the injury, when the surgery took place, the timeline for healing, and it seemed like it would set up to where it would be very difficult for Brock Purdy to be the starting quarterback week 1. It felt very logical to say if that's not going to be the case, the 49ers can hold back an additional roster spot, keep one of those players that otherwise might be grabbed off of waivers by another team, put Brock Purdy onto the physically unable to perform list, bring him back after week 4, have some time to evaluate one of these other 2 quarterbacks at a portion of the schedule that's, let's just say, relatively easier in comparison to the rest of it. When I start listening to Kyle Shanahan's language in speaking about where Brock Purdy is, the timeline, and what he expects, I think that language has changed something for me, that I believe the Niners are operating off of the belief that, I mean, with Brock Purdy already, making these violent throwing motions with a towel in his hand instead of a football, that's surprising to me that that's already where he's at. His opening of the window for when he begins to actually throw the football, like ramping up to that 6-month timeline, it truly feels like he will be good to go at that 6-month point, save for some type of a setback. So I'm going to make my prediction that I think it's Brock Purdy for the entirety of this season. I think he starts week 1 and barring an injury, I think he holds it down at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I think you start to look at this whole thing and the way it plays out, and that's been kind of my belief throughout, is that he's going to be back in time for week 1. I know there's been a lot of discussion as far as what's happening back and forth, right? And it could be week 4, it could be week 1. We don't know when it's going to happen, but all along the 49ers, whether it's the messaging has been the same. I know people like to try to make it like Kyle Shanahan is here and John Lynch is here, Now, I'm not saying that they're together, but their
Right.
messaging has been very similar throughout. Like during the owners' meetings when they both talked, they both said training camp or we'll find out. They both kind of said the same thing. And Kyle Shanahan said that. I know he said week 1, week 4, and all that kind of stuff. But before he said that, he said training camp or week 1 or week 4. And for whatever reason, probably because it just sells better, saying that he might not make it back until week 4, or he might not make it back at all. I think that just sells better to the masses than, well, that's not what they really said was they don't know, and they'll find out more on June 12 weeks, which is June 2nd. They didn't say June 2nd, but they said 12 weeks. So that's the next update. My belief is that it's going to be week 1. It's going to be Brock Purdy. He'll be the starting quarterback. He's came into this thing as the leader. He's doing all the work. I think he's going to be cleared. I'm not a betting man. If I was, I would say he's going to be the week 1 starter. And I would say if I had to put a date on it, it's going to be sometime in the middle of August. By like the 14th of August, we'll see him on the field with the 49ers practicing and cleared to practice and actually go through it. Because he's not going to be on the field practicing with the team unless he's cleared. So we might see him working on the side field, a la Jimmy Garoppolo last year. But as far as actually being out with the team, they're not going to allow that to happen until he's fully cleared. I think that's going to come around the middle of August. We'll see. That's just a guess based off of past quarterbacks that have gone through this process.
Yeah.
Nick Mullins was back after 5 months, but he was cleared. And then you look at the guy that got Tommy John surgery, Jake Delhomme. He was ready to go back at 6 months, and that's supposed to be a year-long procedure. So this is an injury I think that a lot's been made about it. It's been great because we'll talk about it, but I think he's the starter week 1. When you look at the overall quarterback situation, we got Andrew over here. He says Sam Darnold should start. Now, I don't know, but that's really, really tough. I've made some waves because I'm one of those guys who has said Sam Darnold's never been in this situation. We know what Sam Darnold's been to this point. Is he going to be better? I think there's a possibility. You listen to the Trey Lance. Those that are ultimately high on Trey Lance say that he didn't get a chance to play with George Kittle. He didn't get a chance to play with Christian McCaffrey. So if that's going to make Trey Lance better, shouldn't you believe that Sam Darnold's going to get better in that same situation, especially and playing with Kyle Shanahan? We'll see. I think it's a possibility. I thought he played well when, again, you go back and you watch the film of his games from weeks 1 through 3 out in Carolina last year. 68% completion percentage, 260 yards per game, bunch of touchdowns, runs the ball well. It's there, especially when he has a big group around him and he's not asked to carry the team. So Sam Darnold starting week 1, I think that's a stretch, but I think it's going to be a fascinating offseason training camp.
Yeah, I definitely think. I mean, Sam Darnold is in a new situation, and the talent was there for him to be selected 3rd overall as well. I mean, both of these individuals are now in the most advantageous position they have been in within their careers. Lance, because he's been able to actually heal. He's had the offseason. He knows the playbook that much more. And I just want to echo something that you said earlier that I would agree. I don't think the messaging changed for the 49ers. What changed for me was the level of detail they provided. When they started talking about the healing process and what Brock was currently going through, it illuminated for me that they weren't blowing smoke with a 6-month timeline, that it wasn't, hey, 6 months and then start throwing. It was ramping up to that period of being cleared, but truly being able to say at that point he could step in. And then I also thought that Kyle Shanahan used the most blunt language that he has to this point when talking about Trey Lance and the opportunity that he has ahead of him and potentially the opportunity he hasn't gotten because of the way things have played out. And when he talked about, like, I don't have to make the decision. The decision is made by the tape. And he was saying that in reference to what Brock was able to do within that run. To me, it underscores this idea that Brock Purdy showed everyone on film that the team is behind him as the starter, that the evidence shows he's been able to get the job done most effectively, most efficiently at that position. And so I think it's a huge uphill battle for either of the other quarterbacks to gain ground. But what is a very real competition is to be that backup, or for Lance to prove that he belongs to stay with the organization, or shows enough that the Niners get a viable trade offer. I just think there are so many angles to this that are going to be fascinating to watch play out. But it does seem clear that as long as things go well with Brock, he's the man.
Yeah, I do think he needs, in order for that to happen, he needs to be healthy. He needs to be able to compete with it. You talk about the silent tape, and that's where you do have the opportunity for Trey Lance to win the job is there. I believe the opportunity is there for him to win. I've been of that belief throughout that he could win the job, but he needs to, if he's going to get over, he's going to take over Brock Purdy's job. He needs to play at a much higher level throughout training camp than he's done the last couple of years. If he does this, if his training camp this year is the same as it's been, as it was last year, he's not going to beat out Brock Purdy. It's just not going to happen if Purdy's healthy, right?
Right.
If it's at that level, because it wasn't good enough. So we'll see the direction that it goes there. And then, one last thing I'm going to say on the Darnold piece is, guys have shown the ability to play better in better situations. Alex Smith is a really good example of that, but that's not a guarantee. And I don't think that I in my arguments that I've had on Twitter, where I'm not even trying to argue. All I'm saying is there's a possibility that he plays better. And yes, he could become Alex Smith, or he could become not become Alex Smith, and he could just stay the same guy and have happen to him what happened to countless other quarterbacks like Josh Rosen, for example. Josh Rosen taken in the first round at number 10. There's a reason why he was taken at number 10, and he flopped with the 49ers, and he was awful. But there was also people that were, I remember people saying that there was a possibility that the 49ers could win with Josh Rosen, and Josh Rosen never made it past the fourth quarterback in training camp. So we'll see how it plays out. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think the 49ers week 1 starter is Brock Purdy. I do have a super chat over here that I want to pull up, and it's from Phil to B. He says, if Lance isn't up to the job, we don't want to wait till Purdy gets injured midseason. I agree. I'm not sure. Maybe that's just a blanket statement, but if he's not, you don't want to wait. They'll find out. They'll know that. 49ers already, I think, have a good feeling of what they have in Trey Lance.
Right.
And what they need to do there.
And certainly there will be greater snaps available for Sam Darnold and Trey Lance than there would be in any other circumstance where Brock is completely healthy going into it. So there really is a path to success for Trey Lance, right? There is an opportunity to be seized. To your point, in order to seize that starting role, it would have to be a phenomenal performance in the preseason that would allow the Niners to sort of slow play Brock returning and see if it carried into the regular season. That feels unlikely. But to be able to prove that it wasn't a wasted draft pick, that he has a viable future as a quarterback, I think he'll have that opportunity this offseason.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. And then we have, this one here. It says, look, if you watch the 90-plus turnovers, it's pressure on Sam Darnold. I'm just going to stop and I'm going to say this. There's not 90-plus turnovers from Sam Darnold when it comes. It's not. That's not the number. Again, I already challenged the people that have put that out on Twitter myself. It's misinformation to put together fumbles and interceptions as turnovers, because not every fumble that has hit the ground has been a turnover. If you want to say that it shows a lack of ball security, that's one thing. But if you're going to put that number out, it's really easy to see misinformation. And Sam Darnold doesn't have 90-plus turnovers. So I'm just going to push back on that one. The other player too, that I was blanking on the name when I was talking about Josh Rosen, is Blake Bortles was in a similar situation, struggled out in Jacksonville. He had actually, it's funny because Blake Bortles had one good year. Right. And they went to the NFC Championship game, I think it was, that one season. But then he fell on hard times after that, back to where he was, and he ended up in LA and never panned out. So we'll see.
Should be highly fascinating.
It's going to be fun. One of the things that I know is that every day we're going to get done with training camp practice. It's going to start in OTAs, and everybody's going to want to know how each guy performed. which is going to make it a lot of fun, especially during OTAs, because there's very few of us that do YouTube that are actually on site. There's only 3 of us that I know of. So it'll be a lot of fun to get that out there and be talking about the quarterback situation over that time. So we'll see how it goes. It's going to be a lot of fun this offseason with the quarterbacks. And 49ers in general have a number of competitions throughout their roster on top of that. So it should be a lot of fun.
I look forward to daily updates of quarterbacks and kickers, Jack. That's all I need. Give me those. I'll be happy.
Hey, the Jake Moody, that guy's got a leg, and you're going to want to see it, because I can't wait to watch that guy with a kickoff, how hard he was kicking the ball the other day. So that'll be good. That'll be good. But
yes,
Rob,
it will.
You got anything coming up on your channel?
Yes, I will have an episode of Between Two Beards coming out in the next 48 hours. Tune in on Twitter at The Left Schuh, or just go and follow the channel Rob Schuh on YouTube. You can hit the bell notification, and you will get that notification when I go live. Hopefully, Jack and I can work out a day and time to have him on the program as well. We'll get more of this collab going.
Absolutely. We definitely need to do that. And make sure you get over to Rob's channel. It's really easy. Rob Schuh here on YouTube. Make sure you join his group over there. And to everybody that's watching, thank you very much for tuning in. The chat over on the side was a lot of fun. So we got some of those up for everybody to check out. But if you guys like what you're seeing here, please hit that like button, subscribe, and then turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of the updates. And like I said, we've got minicamp or OTAs, coming up next week. So there's going to be a lot of information coming up. So keep it locked in here. Rob, thanks again for taking the time to get together with me.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate you having me.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. We'll talk to you soon. You want to send them out, Rob?
Cheers, faithful.
There we go. See, I like that.